I welcome you back to our continuing investigation of the story of Jesus as told by Matthew the Apostle. We have been working our way through one of the, most somber and darkest portions of Matthew's Gospel, which is the series of woes that Jesus tells of the religious leaders of his day. Matthew chapter 23 and verses 29 to 36 is going to be our portion of scripture in this unit. Matthew chapter 23, reading from the New American Standard Bible. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had been living in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Consequently, you bear witness against yourself that you are some of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the guilt of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how shall you escape the sentence of hell? Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. That upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all of these things shall come upon this generation. The reality of church history is that the people who we revere tend to be the people who were reviled. Notice the connection. The people who we tend to revere are the people who tend to be, in history, reviled. In a wide and sweeping generalization, we are saying that the people who are exalted as heroes of the faith are often people who did not fit into the church of their day. They were often people who, in some way, shape, or form, challenged the way church was done. They were not content to, as it were, play church. In time, a movement, a reformation, or a structural change of the church emerges from their work, and that resulting work reveres that founder. What happens when that work becomes stagnant, becomes locked in the past, becomes locked in the ways that once worked and no longer work? It calls for the rise of an individual who will not be tolerated to move it forward. The cycle repeats itself again and again and again. In this passage, we have Jesus accusing the Pharisees of what we talked of in the opening paragraph here. They are accused of Jesus of revering the memory of those who took a stand for the faith and who were mocked, abused, and in some cases killed. Understand, we're talking about people who were experience these experiences in, as it were, the community of faith. We're not talking about people in that sense being killed by pagans and martyrs to the faith in that sense. Reading the passage straight up, you do not get the ludicrous nature of it. Jesus, when he spoke these words, was still alive. Jesus would one day be killed by the religious leaders of his day. Notice that they were quite willing to revere the past heroes of faith while they had the Son of God in their midst and would not worship him as such. Jesus is saying, look at yourselves. You're not much different than those that have gone before you. And yet, they did not get it. One of my memories when I was much younger was going to Petrified National Forest Park in the state of Arizona. What you find there is the remains of an ancient forest. Now, to put what is there in perspective, think of an archaeological dig site. And if you go to an archaeological dig site that is, well, probably at least 1,000 years old or more. What you will not often find is the remains of any sort of wood. In other words, given enough time that the wood and the wooden structures and maybe the wooden handles and so on and so forth that were used at that place at one time are gone. They rot away. So, one of the things that archaeologists often note is that they can tell where a wooden structure has been placed and been used maybe to provide a beam to support a roof because there is a discernible hole in the ground. Now, nothing remains of the wooden support beam, but they can tell by the hole where the wood is. In the Petrified National Forest, you discover something amazing. You find there a forest that is from the ancient period that still survives. Why does it still survive? Because the ancient trees were fossilized. Now, what is fossilization but the process by which something becomes a rock? A person who is a scientist, a geologist maybe, could better explain it than I. Now, this is great for preserving the forest. In other words, we know that there was a forest here because we can look at these now rocks. And it's great like that to give us a sense and read of this. But how in the world do you build a house with fossilized wood? How do you build a fire with a chunk of that petrified forest? The process of fossilization preserves the past at the expense of that wood being useful. The church is in ever present danger of fossilizing the past. Great leaders led the church to do great things, in spite of opposition in their day and age. What was done provided a way for the church to grow and develop in that age. A new generation in the church arises and reveres that leader and that work. What was once fresh, original, and an actual movement of God becomes fossilized. We do what was done because it was great back then and worked. We are trying to build houses, as it were, with petrified wood. We are trying to create holy fires with petrified wood. In the meantime, men and women who are seeking to lead the church forward are rebuffed and rejected. They are reviled. They are cast aside because their ways are not the ways we do things. The church can revere the past while reviling the ones who seek to bring the church forward into the future.